the situation because I'm in their side. I'm not against them.
Terrific win for Everton. Manchester City, meanwhile, 5 points clear at the top after teenager Kelechi Iheanacho scored a late winner at Crystal Palace. Norwich beat Bournemouth 3-1 at Carrow Road, while Odion Ighalo gave Watford their first win of the season, 1-0 winners over Swansea at Vicarage Road. There were no goals between West Brom and Southampton. Celtic look like they have a serious rival for the Scottish Premiership title. They were beaten by 10-man Aberdeen. The Dons maintaining their 100% record with a 2-1 win at Pittodrie. Elsewhere, Kilmarnock are off the foot of the table after winning 2-1 away at Dundee United. Motherwell and Ross County drew 1-1. Partick Thistle lost 1-0 at home to Dundee, meaning they are now bottom of the table. St Johnstone beat Hamilton 4-1. Britain's Jamie Murray and his Australian partner John Peers have lost their men's doubles final at the US Open. They were beaten in straight sets by the French pair of Nicolas Mahut and Pierre-Hugues Herbert. Murray and Peers came close to a Grand Slam trophy when they lost the doubles final at Wimbledon this summer, but they wasted break points in the first set today against the Frenchman. Much of the problem was that Peers couldn't find his best tennis, whereas Herbert had been displaying his trademark heavy serve, lightning reflexes and a terrific range of shots. Championship point was the most thrilling of the match and won by the Frenchman, who prevailed 6-4, 6-4. And the women's all-Italian singles final has just got underway in New York. Unseeded Italian Roberta Vinci, who saw off Serena Williams in the semis, plays her childhood friend and former doubles partner Flavia Pennetta. Play not long underway, and it is 1-game-all at Flushing Meadows. That's all the sport for now. You can, though, keep up to date with all those stories and more on the BBC Sport website. That's bbc.co.uk/sport. And, of course, we'll have more throughout the evening.
Matt, thank you. Let's bring you some other news now of the day. And at least 89 people have been killed in a gas explosion at a crowded restaurant in the state of Madhya Pradesh in India. Police say a cooking gas cylinder blew up and triggered a second blast of mine detonators stored illegally next to the restaurant. Around 100 people have been injured in the blast, which caused the building's roof to cave in. Our correspondent Sandra Majumdar has more for us.
Well, it took place in the morning in this town in central India, in Madhya Pradesh state. Very crowded at the time because the restaurant itself was packed with people, office goers and a lot of school children having breakfast. It was also in a fairly crowded location. I understand there was a bus station nearby as well, and that's the reason there were so many people at the time. As you say, the police say a gas cylinder used for cooking first exploded and then apparently set on fire. Several explosives that were stored nearby. We're not quite sure whether they were stored in the restaurant or in an adjoining building. And those set off more explosions leading to a massive fire. It's a two-story building which collapsed because of the intensity of the blast. Rescue workers who initially got there had to actually use their bare hands to sift through the rubble to try and get to those trapped underneath.
2 British women have been killed as a train derailed in northern India. The tourists were travelling on a specially chartered train carrying a group of 37 Britons to the Indian Himalayan town of Shimla. York-based Great Rail Journeys, who organised the tour, said a number of people in the group had been hospitalised. The governor of the Saudi region of Mecca has ordered a full investigation into why a crane collapsed on top of the city's Grand Mosque. More than 100 people are now known to have been killed in the incident, which happened during a violent storm. Building work around the mosque, Islam's holiest site, had been continuing ahead of the annual Hajj pilgrimage. Sangeeta Maiska has more.
Mecca in the grip of a sandstorm. A worshipper films from inside the Grand Mosque when outside disaster strikes. A giant crane collapses into the mosque wall. Panic and fear takes hold of the faithful. Hundreds run for their lives. It's still unclear how many were killed as a result of the collapse and how many from the panic that followed.
My mother was inside the mosque and she just heard a loud crashing noise. The weather just, it went dark, and first it was like imagine like a little mini tornado going through the mosque area in the middle, because the middle part where the Kaaba is, it's all open area. Only thing you can see was like lining the place up. And the rain was just horrendous, coming from all directions, and it was just windy.
The scale of the disaster that has befallen the world's biggest mosque complex has been laid bare. The death toll today continues to rise, yet more people are pouring into the city. 2 million worshippers are due for the annual pilgrimage of Hajj. Cranes have surrounded the mosque complex for 2 years as authorities attempt to create accommodation for those arriving.
There has to be some strategy of health and safety, and we clearly don't have that. We have lost hundreds and not thousands of lives over the lapse of 20 plus years.
Repairs to the Grand Mosque complex are already underway, and despite the shadow cast by Friday's events, worshippers have been told the pilgrimage will go on as usual. Sangeeta Maiska.
A Russian astronaut has returned home after breaking the record for the length of time spent in space. In total, after 5 missions, Gennady Peldarka orbited the Earth for 879 days, beating the previous record by 2 months. He celebrated on return to Earth by having a cup of tea and an apple. Let's have a look at the weather back on Earth. Here's Nick Miller.
Hi there. Most of us have seen some rain so far this weekend, but it's largely dry out there. At the moment, there are some clear spells around too. It's fairly windy though if you're close to this area of low pressure. Northwest Scotland and the Western Isles in particular, with some gales in places going into tomorrow morning. Could see some gusts in excess of 50 miles an hour. Through the night, there are showers feeding through the Irish Sea, so adjacent coasts could see those, but most are dry, clear spells around 10 Celsius or so, and some early sunshine tomorrow. Then many places will stay dry, variable cloud and sunny spells. There'll be showers affecting western parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, especially in the afternoon. Turning wetter for Cornwall than Devon, with strengthening winds here and risk of gales by evening. An area of rainfall brushing parts of southeast England, East Anglia and the East Midlands into the afternoon. But again, many places will see dry weather, have temperatures in the upper teens. On Monday, strong winds towards the south coast of England. England and Wales see most of the showers, and heavy at that. The driest weather in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And more areas of low pressure to come next week. More as ever online.
This is BBC News. I'm Chris Rogers. The headlines this hour. Jeremy Corbyn celebrates with his supporters after being elected as the new leader of the Labour Party. The veteran left-winger secured almost 60% of the vote in what turned out to be a landslide victory. Mr Corbyn promises to revive his party's fortunes after defeat in May's general election, but some members of the shadow cabinet have already resigned. Former Government Minister Tom Watson is elected as Deputy Labour leader. He promises to back Mr Corbyn 100% and is seen as a key figure in maintaining party discipline. In other news, at least 2 British tourists have been killed after a train travelling to the Indian town of Shimla derailed. The train had been chartered privately and was carrying more than 30 British tourists. Officials in Saudi Arabia order an investigation into the crane that collapsed in the Muslim holy city of Mecca. 107 people were killed and more than 200 injured. Let's catch up with the world of business now in Talking Business.
China's economic boom over the last few decades has been built on dirty fuel. But now it says it's trying to change and has invested billions into renewable energy. But all of this is coming at a time as the economy here slows down. Will China keep to its commitment of green growth in the face of a weaker economic outlook? We'll be discussing all of these issues at the World Economic Forum here in Dalian, China. China has made remarkable progress when it comes to trying to clean up its act, and certainly on paper, the commitment to green growth appears to be there. But as the economy slows down, will those commitments be sacrificed at the altar of chasing higher GDP rates? Joining me to discuss these issues is a distinguished panel of experts. Gao Jifan, the chairman and chief executive of Trina Solar. It's one of the world's largest producers of solar panels. Now, Mr. Gao will be speaking in Mandarin, and you'll be listening to a simultaneous translation of what he has to say. Next to him is Paul Pullman. He's the global chief executive of the consumer giants group Unilever. It's impossible to enter a household these days that doesn't have one of their products. 2 billion people use Unilever products every single day. And Changhua Wu is the director of China's climate group. She also sits on the Global Agenda Council on Governance for Sustainability. And finally, we have Russian tycoon Oleg Deripaska. He is the president of Rusal, the world's largest aluminum producer. So I'm going to launch straight in. And I'm going to start with you, Ms. Wu. I know that you have long discussions and you've sat down with senior levels of the Chinese government about their commitments. And on paper, they sound very, very admirable. They sound like they're really serious. But given the fact that the economy is now taking a downturn, will these commitments be compromised?
I think it's fundamentally we need to understand why the political leaders in China today is so committed to green growth. The biggest reason actually behind that, we recognize ecological, environment, and resource constraints are already the biggest cost, not only economic cost, but the social cost to Chinese economy, economic growth. So that becomes the biggest driver for the political leaders in China, for this whole country coming together to commit to green growth.
You look at 12th Five-Year Plan that was set off in 2011. They had all of these commitments to green growth in it, and some 7 objectives, including cleaning up air pollution, making water far cleaner to drink. How close are they to achieving those targets, given the fact that the deadline is in 2015, this year?
We're at the very end of the 12th Five-Year Plan. If you look at energy efficiency target, renewable energy target, pollution control, emissions targets, we are very close. We are pretty much on the track already. But just achieving those targets does not mean we solve the environmental problems totally. So they are intermittent, actually. So this is a long journey China is already on, but somehow every 5 years we set those specific targets, make sure we put policy incentives together to drive them to achieve that. And China is doing a pretty good job.
Mr. Deripaska, what about your experiences? I mean, we were just talking a little earlier on about what you've seen while you've been here. Do you think that's fair, that China is doing enough to achieve these targets?
There is a lot of commitment, as it was said, and but China is a big economy, which was developed literally in less than 15 years, and they create challenges for themselves, and it's clear now to maintain this type of growth they need to have a very significant change, and I don't know how quickly they would be able to do it, but so far they haven't started yet.
They haven't started.
In my view, they haven't started. And it's a very clear sign. You can see pollution from coal-fired plant. There is nothing but in coal. It's just a matter how much you pollute and what cap system established in each provinces and how you control and monitor this cap system. Then you need to understand what type of coal you burn, how high sulfur, some other element, how you make a waste treatment. But to be honest, China being able to produce just 13% of world GDP pollute more than 26%. And it's a clear sign that the energy balance not properly structured. And to change the structure, by 2015, by 2020, by 2000, even by 2030, it's not enough action so far.
Speaking about coal, though, you've benefited from the fact that China, or you are benefiting from the fact that China needs all this coal to power its economy forward. I understand that your company, EN Plus, is in the process, or has already started selling 800,000 tons of coal to China. How do you square that contradiction? On one hand, you're sitting on this panel telling us China isn't doing enough, but on the other hand, you're also trying to sell your coal to China.
We have joint venture with the biggest China company, Shenhua, and as I said, coal is energy source which China wouldn't be stopping using tomorrow, or even day after tomorrow. The issue is how they would be able, to produce power out of this coal. Would be carbon capture, which I don't believe, wouldn't be, more higher, and tighter control of sulfur. But I think most important is, they really need to see what they use energy for, which they, derive out of the coal. If they produce steel, they produce 60% of the world's steel. They consume only 25% of all this production, to be honest. That's overproduction. Create major problem in cement, steel, even aluminum, glass industry. Why? All these companies, they're not profitable. If they're not profitable, they couldn't invest in modernization. we saw what's happened on equity markets, and of course we're lucky that it didn't touch financial market, debt market in China, because debt market is a major source of investment and opportunity, for the changes. And I think it's a key strategy which should be accessed. Somehow, carbon control should be a real issue as an absolute parameter for each provinces, for each city, and optimization of this, let's say numbers, it's a major target.
Right, I'm going to bring you in here, Mr. Gao Jifang. As one of the world's largest solar panel producers, how do you square the circle of the fact that coal is just so much cheaper to use at a time when the economy is slowing down? How do you propose that companies like yours are able to have more business in China?
The Chinese government, in fact, has treated what we call ecological civilization as an important strategy. They are emphasizing green growth and green development. And this is going to be China's growth strategy. And there are very concrete plans. For example, by 2020, the non-fossil fuel use will have to go from 10% to 15%. By 2030, non-fossil use will have to reach 20%. During APEC last year, President Xi said by 2030, we had to reach the peak of emissions, carbon emissions. So the government has a very long-term and clear target. Of course, given that, we have to say, over the last few years, the renewable energy industry, including wind and solar, have seen rapid growth.
How much is renewable energy, like solar energy, contributing to China's growth right now?
At the moment, non-fossil proportion is growing, that ratio is growing. Over the next few years, it's going to grow by 5 percentage points. And solar is about 1%, but it's been a very short time. We really only been developing it for 3 to 4 years, but annual growth has been significant. And this year, we're going to grow about 18 gigawatts. So the growth rate has accounted for a third of the world's total. So new energy sources accounts for a large proportion.
Paul, I'd like to bring you in at this point. What I would like to know is your experience of having dealt with supply chains across China. How do you ensure, because it seems to me that this is a question of regulation and ensuring that these laws are implemented at every level. How do you ensure that your supply chain...
Well, it's obviously very important that frameworks are in place to accelerate this conversion. So 1/3 of the investments of renewable energy in the world are actually happening in China right now. 1/4 of the R&D. So whilst the starting point is not very good, whilst the actual situation requires a drastic intervention, I think the country is too high. What you find in our supply chains, obviously, we have in China and many of our fellow industry members, that you are getting fairly close to a point that you can set up your supply chains in a far more sustainable way without actually incurring the economic disadvantages in terms of ability to compete. When China hits its emission standards, sometimes they cut down the energy. If you operate on the biomass, you can keep your factories going. Wind power now is probably in China, or solar is probably one of the most cost-attractive options. Carbon pricing is coming in, obviously, to stimulate that as well. You talk about the cheap price of coal in one of your previous questions, $100 a ton. But is it a cheap price if the cost to society is another $200 a ton?
But do companies care about that? Do businesses?
The Chinese government does, and increasingly they're aware of it. The beauty in this age of transparency is that you can measure everything. And you can now see what the cost of air pollution is, for example, which is a direct consequence of coal. And the government is well aware of that. 10% of GDP, some people would estimate, is the price you pay for this. So if you look at these externalities and try to put these externalities in it, you'll see a faster conversion fast. and China is looking at putting a price on carbon. In fact, there are some pricing mechanisms already in the market here that they're experimenting with. So we think that this will go relatively quickly by necessity, but also for the very good reasons that we're all aware of.
It is also a question of implementation, because you can have the central government saying one thing, but on the ground, I mean, you know, I've spent a lot of time reporting in Indonesia and in India as well. It's the same problem there. It doesn't get carried out at the local level. The local provincial governor has a totally different idea of what green growth means. So how do you fix that problem here?
We're changing that. That has been part of the major challenges in China over the last couple of decades. We set a lot of targets, very ambitious, but in reality, the record performance has been relatively poor because on the enforcement side. So the government has already, particularly from national government, has taken this as a major issue they need to overcome. So what is happening now? Basically, all the governors, mayors, local government officials, they sign a sort of contract with the national government. And if you take the number, negotiate the number, whatever the target is actually, and you are held accountable to deliver that. And so that's, we'll see by the end of this year how that's going to be happening.
And this is coming now, Ms. Wu, at a time when the economy is slowing down. The government themselves have been criticized for backtracking on their reform agenda and possibly using old ways of doing business, old ways of making money. Do you think they'll stay committed?
I would, yeah, there's always a risk. But overall, I have the confidence in the leadership in of this generation, this commitment to green growth. And so with this laws, regulations, particularly actually they amended the new environmental law, which is regarded as the first piece of environmental legislation in China that really has a teeth in it, with the increased liabilities for local government officials, for companies, whatever, for environmental quality. And you started to see all the laws, regulations, the policy incentives, whatever. The context actually in China created already today on the ground. I don't think they're going to go back.
What about you, Mr. Derek Pascal? What's your experience been?
You need to fix energy structure. And if I don't remember correctly, now China has 1.3 billion gigawatt installed capacity, a trillion gigawatt installed capacity. And if 60% is coal, you need to understand, if you want to reduce emission, you need to build, almost equal amount of, renewable, nuclear, other renewable. Is it possible? Of course not. Then you need to change economic structure. Why you need so many heavy industry? What China gets, producing, so much cement, steel, glass, and so others. Why it couldn't be placed in Indonesia, for example. Why it could be properly, structured here in terms of, more optimized capacity. Because, as I said, if company will not earn enough money, they will never be able to invest. Whatever regulation, whatever penalties, will be always an excuse found by regional authorities. How to help them, how to make. And one more issue, price. Yeah. Power price. It was mentioned coal price. Coal price in China not $100. Coal price in China $50. And this is a result of slowdown. And as a result, power produced from coal-fired plants, it will become cheaper. And of course, it's not create enough incentive. Plus, power reform, needs to deal not with a state power company, but also with a private, with some so-called block power station. Which each plant built for for itself, and even not connected to the grid. That's why I think key issue is how to cap carbon emission in absolute terms, not in numbers of percent, because these numbers sometimes hide reality, but how to cap it and how create incentive for entrepreneurs.
I think you're starting to see, and we have seen since 2013 at least in this country, hundreds of protests from the public about these sorts of environmental issues, and not too far away from here in Tianjin, the anger about that chemical explosion. I think that's what's really driving a lot of the pressure on the government about these sorts of issues. How can business help, Mr. Pong?
Well, first of all, it's not just China. I think people all across the world are speaking up. You see it from the Turkeys to the Brazils to the Indias to the Chinas. And even in my own country, the Netherlands, the government was taken to court for not being aggressive enough achieving their green targets. So people are speaking up.